Tonight, we look at the story that has been told about the murder of JonBenet Ramsey and why so many think her parents guilty, and what this tells us about the America she so briefly lived in.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. This is episode 37 in the ongoing series. In this episode we're going to look at Patsy, and we're going to go beyond her story as a pageant queen, as a former Miss West Virginia, beyond her personality, beyond what we know about her as a high society woman, as perhaps a shopper, as a home decorator, as someone who was very active in the social circles of her community. As a southerner, we're going to go into a totally different dimension that I think is very underexplored, and that is Patsy the painter. And our first hint of this side to Patsy, this hobby that Patsy had, came from around about October 6, 1997, in a People magazine article, Mom and Dad Under Suspicion. And on page, I think, 100 of that magazine article, there's a quote from People magazine. Quote, "The cops are apparently trying to wear down the Ramseys until one of them, likely the more volatile Patsy, breaks. One weapon maybe leaks to the press. For instance, the stick attached to the rope that strangled JonBenet was broken off one of Patsy's paintbrushes," end quote. Now, you might run with that and say, well, okay, so, let's talk about the garrote and let's talk about this or that. But what about talking about Patsy and Patsy's painting? And so that is what we're going to do in this episode. Before we get to that, just a big thank you to the 100 or so people who've subscribed since the last video. You can subscribe by clicking the blue icon on the bottom right of your screen. Like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. During Patsy Ramsey's interrogation with Steve Thomas and Tom Trujillo, this was in late April 1997, there was a reference to this whole thing about painting. Trujillo asks her, "So you took painting classes in the fall?" Patsy answers, "Right." Trujillo says, "Well, what kind of classes?" Patsy says, "Down at the Colorado University." Trujillo wants to know, well, was it watercolor or oil? Patsy answers, well, you could do either one, acrylic or oils. And so Trujillo says, okay, so which one did you do? Patsy responds, "I started out with oil, but then I changed to acrylic because it got on my car and she said it smelled real bad, so I switched." Trujillo, "Do you normally keep the painting supplies in that area where the checkered board stuff is?" Patsy, "Yeah, we had it there for a long time, and then around the holidays I moved all that to the basement." Now, when she says I moved all that to the basement, doesn't that mean Patsy herself moved all that to the basement? Now, you're going to see in a moment, saying I moved all that to the basement could also mean, well, I told someone to move it to the basement, right? Anyway, Trujillo says, okay. Patsy says, because we put coat racks and things in there for parties. Trujillo, okay. What part of the basement do you recall moving the painting supplies to? Patsy, I don't remember. I think Linda took all that down there. I think it was I don't remember storing everything. I don't remember where she put it. Trujillo, is that how much stuff are we talking about? So let's just stop at this point. So it's just an ordinary conversation about painting and painting supplies. And as I said earlier on, Patsy said, I took it all down there. Her words are, I moved all that to the basement. And then when he starts talking about the painting supplies, I don't know whether Patsy thinks about the painting tray and the evidence side of the crime. Then it was Linda. Linda took all of that down there. And then she says, I don't remember where she put it. It's her painting supply. She doesn't remember where she put it. Then Patsy says, well, I had a bunch of big canvases, had a Santa by the lawn and a big easel, a big tall easel. and then like a white caddy kind of thing, which I think is, she's talking about a golf thing, and then she talks about a plastic thing that a bunch of paint in. That's the tote. That is the kind of a vital piece of evidence in terms of that piece of the paintbrush that they actually found in it. And then Trujillo says, so some place in the basement is where all of that was left. And so Patsy answers yes. Now, before we get to John's side of the story, I just want to give you a little bit of insight into my knowledge of the art world. I'm from a family of artists. There are 4 quite prominent artists in my family. My brother's been a full-time artist for most of his life. My aunt is quite a well-known artist in her neck of the woods and author. And my great-uncle is a well-known artist, my late great-uncle. Probably the most famous artist in my family is Tinus de Jong, who was originally from the Netherlands, and he was actually invited by the Queen of the Netherlands at the time to come to the palace and paint. And as far as I recall, he also painted South Africa, one of South Africa's presidents. And anyway, he's a very well-known artist in South Africa. Is known as one of the master landscapers, and so there's quite a lot to say about that. But the point is, growing up, I sort of grew up surrounded to some extent by artists, and so you get to sort of feel like how can I put it? There's always something artisty lying around the house, meaning easels, oil paints or whatever, dirty clothing, cloths, all the sort of equipment that artists use. So it's not something that you can really sequestrate, if I can put it that way. It's not something that stays in one little room and it's sort of sequestered from the rest of the house, right? It's something that tends to find its way into the rest of the house, whether in terms of cleaning clothing or purchasing certain things and then needing to test them, in a ventilated room or whatever it is. There's a lot of cleaning of materials, so it might be paintbrushes or whatever, using certain cleaning solvents to clean them, and so that's all I'm trying to get at, is that when you have an artist in your home, it's something that you're aware of. There are smells, there are stains, and there are little tools that are associated with that, from paintbrushes to little palette knives to all sorts of things. And so you can kind of imagine that in the Ramsey family that was going on as well. Now we're going to get to that. I think in the Patreon section we'll deal with when Patsy did this, why she did this. And it's a really interesting dimension to Patsy as a person that I think's been very much underreported. So what I can also tell you is that my brother was very active in his painting when we were children, and I initially also drew alongside him, and then I went off on a different path. First of all, I wrote a lot more, I read a lot more, and also the art that I did was totally different. It was far more, modern art, and it was far more kind of conceptual and abstract, whereas his was very much painting sort of what you see. And but the fact is that I was certainly impacted by what he was doing. You were aware of, as I say, when he was cleaning things, you could smell the turpentine. There was a lot of hammering of canvases and things coming into the house and going, and all sorts of things. And obviously one of the things that was involved in that was duct tape. You would use duct tape to put the canvases together to some extent, and it was also used in framing. I think the bottom line, though, is that when an artist, it involves a lot of craft. It involves a lot of not only creativity, but working with your hands, working with materials, working with wood, with canvas, with all sorts of different materials. It's not only painting onto the canvas, it is creating the canvas, in other words, making the actual substrate, and then also framing it and all the things that go into that. Now we go to the interrogation by Lew Smith and Mike Kane of John Ramsey on this subject. And this is from the 23rd of June 1996. And I'm going through the Candy Rose archive of this. And Lew Smith asks John, okay, so one more area. Everybody has heard about, and then he says, I can't say that. What have you heard about a paint tray? And John says, just what I read or tried not to read, but can't help but hear the media that tell us a broken paintbrush that was used as part of the, you see, I found John Bonet. I never saw a cord or that sort of thing. I thought I saw a cord, but I didn't focus on it or realize there was anything in the way of a twister, which apparently it was. It was apparently was a paintbrush, and that's based on what I heard in the media. That's my impression. That's all I really heard. Now, just to stop him at that point, remember right after this, John and Patsy addressed the media, and one of the things John said was addressing the allegations that John Bonet may have been molested, and he said that's really offensive to them. But what is kind of crazy is, so this is evidence surrounding his daughter, and he sort of doesn't really, he says, I tried not to read it in the media. I can't help but hear it in the media, but he didn't really want to know about it. So, yeah, you have his own daughter. This is months after the fact, and certain fragments and artifacts are lodged in her body and also surrounding her body, and he apparently isn't interested in knowing about it. And yet, do you remember how he was asked during the interview, so what's next? And he said, well, I am going to be looking for her killer. That's the mission for the rest of my life. Do you remember that?
Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey, what do you want to say to the killer of your daughter?
We'll find you. We will find you. I have that as a sole mission for the rest of my life.
So if you juxtapose that attitude of, I'm going to investigate, I want to find the killer of John Bonet, which is, this statement was made shortly after their very first interview. This one that we're quoting from is actually from June 1998. But it is interesting that when Lew Smith asked him about this, he says, well, I don't really know much about what you're talking about. Well, how come? What do you know? Just what I read or tried not to read. He says, I can't help hear what the media is saying. Wouldn't you want to pay attention to what the media is saying? And then he says something about a broken paintbrush, and he says something about what I heard in the media, that's my impression. That's all I really heard. You would think that as a father investigating the killer of his daughter, he would, after this length of time, almost a year and a half, that he would have a lot of information on it. So he just says he has an impression, and that's all he heard, just something that he stumbled upon in the media. Lew Smith says, your impression then of that literature then, what did you picture that to be in your mind? I mean, you hadn't seen it. John says, I did remember, I mean, the cord on her arms was kind of an unusual cord. It wasn't a piece of twine or heavy string or anything. So he's now moving the conversation away to the string now, away from the stick, right, the paintbrush. And he says, that's all I really noticed. And then Lew Smith says, I'd like to show you a series of photographs. It starts at photograph 175, 178, 181, and 179. And he says, and he wants to show these photographs to Mr. Ramsey. Now, are you telling me that he had never seen these photos himself? I mean, the Ramseys did ask for the discovery. And so he's not talking about that when he speaks to Lew Smith. He doesn't talk about the discovery. He talks about what he's read in the media. And then John Ramsey says, well, it's a tray of artist brushes. So because John doesn't talk about it, Lew Smith's kind of got to lead him to that point to say, okay, do you see this picture right here? Can you talk about what is here? And so he says, okay, well, it's a tray of artist brushes, it looks like, which I presume was Patsy and John Bonet. So now it's Patsy's and John Bonet. So John Bonet seems like she was also drawing. Now, I don't want to be too critical here, because I can also tell you when my brother drew pictures, I often did as well. And that often does happen when you've got young children, they draw at the same time. So you can also imagine that Burke was also drawing pictures. What do children do at kindergarten? They bring home pictures. And so if the mother's also drawing, you can kind of imagine all three children, Patsy, John Bonet, and Burke, drawing pictures. Does that make sense? I see we're at about the 15-minute mark. I'm not going to take it further than this on YouTube. If you want to get the rest of the episode, head on to Patreon. That's patreon.com/TCRS. And you can join the wonderful community there. You can also join them in wishing me happy birthday. It's my birthday today. And so we welcome you onto the channel there. Thank you for listening. In February 1999, a fascinating article appeared in a publication, Boulder Weekly Gossip, and it was titled "A Ramsey Story Not Found in Schiller's Book." And this is all about Patsy's art.